Well, how do you move from that, from being colonized people to a free people? Well, you have to first demystify yourself. That means you have to get educated. The second level is we have to move into self-reliance. And this is what this conversation is about. How is it so that you can talk to black people and they'll tell you that the white man's ice is colder than the black man's ice? That's because of internalized oppression. So we have to, those of us who are willing to work together, can work together to start to build this whole conversation of self-reliance.
Well, I've witnessed over the last probably a month since the protests have started. I'm hearing more conversation around sushus in the black community than I've ever heard before. I was made aware of this system of elevating individuals um, collectively through a way of building wealth almost 20 plus years ago, and it was coming from a Caribbean friend who I connected with. And now, over the last 30 days, I've heard more conversations about susu in the black community than I've ever heard before. So I think that and feeling that that energy now is beginning to shift around how we see each other, how we can begin to trust each other about doing collective efforts around building wealth in small and large ways in the black community. I want to just turn to a quick definition from Marianne Williamson as she defined what wealth creation is. She said the operative word is not wealth, but creation. Our greatest untapped gold mine is the place within us where we learn to create material wealth out of the wealth of the spirit. And as you all know, Mary Williamson was one of the early candidates vying for the presidency of the United States. Um, she was one of the few, and probably the only one, who echoed out a platform around reparations here in the United States. And hopefully, that conversation we'll be having next week, and we'll be able to see more of that conversation come up to be. But it was also Mahatma Gandhi who said nothing in history has been so disgraceful to the human intellect as the acceptance among us of the common doctrines of economics as a science. And he talked about that golden rule, but he also talked about the law of karma supersedes the law of economics. The law of karma exceeds the law of economics. I think Mr. Mott, I don't know if he's been called away. As I said earlier, he was headed to the airport, but I'm just happy that he took a time out of his busy schedule today to join us. So I want to move into talking with, pose some questions to our other two panelists, Jerry Mitchell, as well as Antoine Thompson. I do want to make note to those here on the line that this month, August, is Black Business Month. And it recognizes the Black-owned businesses across the country. And so we know that in during this coronavirus, we've lost over 400,000 Black businesses. 400,000 Black businesses, which is about 40% loss of all the Black businesses in the United States we've lost as a result of this coronavirus. So Jerry, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, Ron.
Okay, great. So Jerry, share with us. You know, you lead a chamber of commerce in Alabama. You work in rural as well as urban um, areas, supporting Black businesses. You know, one of the things that we've always said around Black businesses that they don't have access to capital, and that many Black businesses start with money leveraged on their credit cards or families or friends. So
Right.
what role do you see that financial institutions need to make at this moment in time in terms of supporting Black businesses, particularly during this major loss of Black businesses that we're seeing across the country?
Well, we're seeing a number of banks come out with different programs to try to reach out to the communities. Although I will say that a lot of them are not as effective as they can be, and we've seen kind of I would say the organizations that are probably in the best positions to reach out in some cases are our CDFIs, which are community development financial institutions, more so than our traditional banks and things like that. So we see the CDFIs and the credit unions because those guys are more on the ground, more in the community, talking to people, seeing what they need. We saw some of that with the first go round with the CARES Act, with the PPP money, where I think I saw some numbers like only around about 5% of our folks applied. So, we didn't have a lot of people getting it. And there were a lot of issues with a number of the banks. So what we do with our organization, we have about 7 financial entities that we work with, some in-state and out-of-state, and those range from banks to credit unions to CDFIs, and we talk to the individual seeking funding, and we find the best fit for them because not everybody fits with a bank. A lot of times, for any number of reasons, it could be maybe a credit score, it could be possibly the type of business. They may not be a fit for a traditional bank, but typically we can find them some funds either with maybe a CDFI or a credit union. In some cases, we found individual investors. I have a story that often comes to mind whenever we talk about access to capital. I'll go back to the late 90s. I had a business, and I created a business plan, polished it up. It was looking good. Everybody told me it was great. I did what they told me to do, which was to go to the banks, present the plan, and hopefully you would be in position to get funding. I had a high credit score, had all the things that they told me it was, but I was turned down by all the major banks. And as it turned out, I was able to get it from a small rural bank only because an associate of mine was a good friend and had played basketball with the gentleman that was running the bank, and that was really the only reason I was. And then later on, I had the same situation where I needed funding, and I actually wound up going to after being turned down by all the banks, I wound up going to my church and just talking with my pastor, and of course he prayed for me and told me that of course he didn't have the money that I needed. I think I only needed around $15,000 to $20,000, but that he would bring it up to the congregation to see if any members of the congregation would support what I was doing. And it was just like the previous gentleman talked about, that circle of trust. Later that night, when it was announced in the church, nobody raised their hand to loan me any money. But later on that night, I've got calls from 5 individuals that were interested in assisting me, and they did, and we wrote agreements and we moved forward. So, so what we look for, we look for different entities to try to make sure that our guys are positioned after, in some cases we work with them to make sure they're going to meet the various criteria. They will, they're in position to receive some funds. And one other thing I want to mention, I was very interested in what the other gentleman was saying, but one of the things we focus primarily on entrepreneurship as a means of economic development. The great thing about that is, we know that entrepreneurs create jobs for people in our communities. They contribute to our economic growth, and they create new opportunities for others. So when I think about this, I can think of something as small. We had a gentleman that had a construction firm, and one of the things he did, and we always hear about how members of our community who have been incarcerated have not been able to get decent jobs once they come out, or jobs that pay a living wage. And one of the things that he did, because he had his own business, he was able to hire individuals and pay them at an amount well above the minimum wage. And then, we look at other things that are highlighted on a much higher level. We saw where billionaire businessman Robert Smith was able to FT spoke at Morehouse was able to pay the debt of the entire class of 2019, which they say came around $40 million. So those are just some of the things that you can do if you work through, in the entrepreneurial process, creating these jobs, making opportunities for other people. But now what we're doing, Ron, is just making sure that we have as many approaches for to put money out to people that are trying, finding opportunities, coming up with ideas as possible. And there's not one, I would say there's not a one thing that fits everybody. It's going to take multiple approaches.
Well, Jerry, I want you to hold a placeholder on that, because I want you to at some point talk about some of those multiple approaches that we need to start to implement in our organizations, in our communities, to sort of get and gain and create more access to capital. I want to bring Antoine into this discussion. He's the National Executive Director of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. Their main objective is to work towards increasing home ownership in the country. And so, Antoine, and I'm going to pose the same question to you. You certainly want to see this increase of Black home ownership, because you, as an organization, have recognized that was one of the first pathways to creating generational wealth for Black folks, owning real estate. And so what are you experiencing in the financial marketplace at this moment in time that you see that needs to be done to start to qualify and give more credit worthiness in terms of access to capital to new Black homeowners coming into the marketplace?
Well, first, Ron, I want to thank you for having me on the program today. I want your attendees of the webinar to know that it is correct that real estate is the number one way that we build and accumulate wealth in the country. It is a situation right now where there are a lot of opportunities for African Americans who are mortgage ready to become homeowners. Most people are not aware that, according to Freddie Mac, which is a federal quasi-government entity that guarantees mortgages, they have provided data to our association, National Association of Real Estate Brokers, showing that there are over 2.5 million African Americans that are mortgage ready in the country, meaning there are 2.5 million African Americans that have good credit, don't have judgments on their credit report, have a good job, but for some reason they're renting in the country. There are 1.7 million Black millennials in the country that make over $100,000 a year, but they are renting apartments, and some are driving fancy cars. So there is this stigma out there that says or suggests this false narrative that the reason why Black people aren't getting mortgages is because they all have bad credit. And while the average credit score for a Black person is lower than the average white credit score, the fact of the matter is, according to the government, there are over 2.5 million Black people that are mortgage ready, and the focus should be twofold. One is to get those individuals that are mortgage ready onto the path of home ownership, of having accessible, affordable, and sustainable mortgages, and then at the same time making sure that we get the people who are not mortgage ready, meaning they have some financial challenges, the technical support and housing counseling that they need. At the same time, we must also make sure that there is regulatory and legislative relief for Black people that are owning homes and those that are desirous of owning a home. Because unfortunately, this system of mortgage lending and in banking in the country was not built for Black people. In fact, it was designed to exclude us. So for the last 50 years or so, we have tried to push for policies that are in a system that was not designed for the purpose of helping Black people. So the market right now in the country, some markets are very competitive, meaning in some of the coastal cities, there's a shortage of inventory, meaning shortage of homes on the market, which is driving up the price and making it very difficult. But in many parts of the country, there's a different experience. There are homes on the market. There are what we call mortgage deserts and banking deserts where people can't get mortgages because of redlining and whatever name they choose to call it, where they don't want to provide loans to people in certain neighborhoods for whatever reason or criteria that they determine. And so the opportunity is there, but we've got to fight for this American dream called home ownership.
So you mentioned that you've gotten some research from Freddie Mac, a quasi-public-private entity developed by the government. So when we talk about public policy around wealth building, where should we be going with public policy right now in terms of ensuring that equal access to credit, equal access to wealth building is afforded in Black communities, and moving beyond the redlining, the economic redlining that has taken place over the least last 60 or 60, 70 years?
So there are a few things that we all should be fighting for, right? So I have come up with a term called restorative, policies to deal with historic discrimination. We all know about restorative justice in the criminal justice system. So we need to have restorative policies to deal with historic discrimination. And what I mean by that is making sure that cities and states and the federal government are challenging themselves and the private sector as well, because in the local community they had racial covenants that in many communities around the country where African Americans could not buy in certain neighborhoods. Black people couldn't have their names on deeds in certain communities, and they had these restrictive covenants, right? We need to have some redress. We need to have restorative policies that help African Americans advance in those communities as a result of government-supported, initiated discrimination. Secondly, in every community across the country, it will be a beautiful thing for our folks to be working with others, calling for city, county, and state officials at every level, city councils, examining the racial disparities in lending and home ownership in the city of Dayton or Baltimore or Los Angeles or Birmingham. The county in that government holding a hearing. We've got all these governments. Every level needs to be held accountable in weighing in on combating the unfair practices. And then we need to make sure that they invest more in home ownership related and wealth building opportunities. They can do it. We know that when they want to provide incentives for business, they'll use your tax dollars, they'll use state dollars, they'll create all these different quasi-government entities at the local level, at the state level, and at the federal level to support any cause that they want. And what we need to do as a community of activists is demand that they are just as aggressive in advancing Black home ownership as they are with these other things. Because of this, 40% or more of all small businesses start in the home. If most of our people want to start a business, whether it's a contracting company, a baked good place, selling flower seeds, doing graphics, computer repair, construction company, most of the time it starts in the home. And if you don't have a house and you want to get a business loan, it's very hard to have collateral if you don't have a house. So the house is not just a home for living, it's also that thing that brings instability and then allows people to send their kids to college, and it allows people to use that asset for a variety of purposes. That is why white America has always fought for real estate ownership, and that is why coming out of World War I and the Great Depression in the 30s, they were very intentional on expanding wealth building opportunities for whites at the exclusion of blacks for over 30 years. And then once we had the Fair Housing Act passed in '68, it didn't have any teeth. It would be years, almost 10 years later, before we had the Community Reinvestment Act in 1977. And right before that, we had the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, I believe, in 1973. So even in '68, when we passed the Fair Housing Act, it didn't allow us to do what we really need to do. And we've been fighting ever since. So we have to demand that we deal with this issue of banking deserts and black home ownership, because it impacts everything. You can just ask, Bill Gates, you can ask the Dell family, you can ask the Hewlett-Packard family, and you can ask the Zuckerberg family, where would they be if they did not have a home to start their business in? And they're all very successful.
Thank you. Jerry, I stated earlier
Yes, sir.
that we lost 41% of the black businesses have gone down since the COVID-19 pandemic. 41% of black business has been lost, only 17% of white businesses.
Mm-hmm.
We know that that's a significant number when you look at mainstream businesses versus our black businesses. So if we've lost so many black businesses, where does that leave us in terms of being able to place our hope in that black businesses will be the panacea for creating more economic opportunities in black communities?
Well, let me tell you. Well, what they was not reported is the number of black businesses that are being developed during the same time that the COVID-19 panic is going on. We've had a number of folks launch businesses during that the same season. One of the things that entrepreneurs do, they see opportunities, they come up with ideas, and what makes the entrepreneurs different, they actually take action. You know, they see opportunities that others may not see, and that's one of the things going on. You know, the fastest growing segment really are black females. They're the fastest growing segment in our state. That's not widely reported. I know that's the same in several other areas across the country. So we're going to help the guys that we can help. You know, the information that's put out on our businesses is, I would say, is not always entirely accurate. I mean, we know of some businesses that have closed, but we also know of a large number of businesses that have started in the same time frame. Now, I want to go back to one thing that we were talking about. You asked when you asked me about the funding for our business, access to capital. Some of the things, just based on what I've seen, I mean, we still got the large banks doing their thing, and you know, they roll out various programs. But one of the things that we don't do is we don't really use our voices enough, as the gentleman with NARAB was talking about. We don't necessarily use our voices. We use them when things happen. They're more reactionary. But, you know, we've got to have it where we have a sustained voice talking about, you know, the lack of access, you know, the credit issues and those things. We should be talking about them on our radio stations, in our newspapers, in our online media. This should be constant. It should not just be a situational thing where we have a particular crisis or something happens and we talk about it for that moment and then it goes by the wayside. Also, I would love to see us increase the numbers of Black directed and controlled CDFIs. Those financial entities are a lot easier to get started. What we find is the ones that are controlled by Black people, they typically do not have as much money, so we need to support those. And another thing I want to point out is we've got to make sure when we have things that come out like with the CARES Act, the PPP, that they actually go out and talk to Black businesses and find out what's best, because it's only been this last go around with the PPP that they made it where CDFIs were actually eligible to distribute funds. And, as I said, those guys are more community oriented, more on the ground than say a typical bank is. And then I would say we've also got to take advantage of the leverage. We've got to leverage the influence that we have. We've had, we've seen in a city here in our state where folks are not getting a lot of business loans and some housing loans, but not a lot of business loans. And yet we had a Black church that had $20 million sitting in a bank. That $20 million should have been leveraged to let that bank know, hey, you need to be making some loans, some business loans and home loans and whatever to more of our people. But we, for whatever reasons, tend not to leverage the might that we have. So those are some things that I believe that we can do. And the last thing I would point out, we need to get more people of color in the decision positions when it comes to lending. Typically, when you go to a bank, you may, even if you find a Black manager in some cases, that individual may not have the pen to either override a decision by the underwriters or that kind of thing. But it's generally not a person of color that's doing those kinds of things. We've seen it in pretty much all of the banks. So we need more of our guys in those positions who can understand some of the things that are going on in our communities and can help change those minds, override an underwriter in the case of a bank, if you will, because we've seen it happen on the other side. I know of several cases where I've dealt with white business owners, and they've told me that somebody at the bank did an override for them, and they got the funding that they need. So we need more people and more understanding in that as well. So those are just some of the things that we're seeing where we are.
Well, I certainly agree with you wholeheartedly, Jerry. Just recently, we had a conversation with the folks at Truist Bank. Now, Truist is a new bank that came about in late 2019 as a result of the merger between BB&T and SunTrust. And so one of the things, we got a call from one of our community partners complaining about how the bank was initiating its community benefit agreement. And so I responded by calling one of the regional vice presidents and voicing my disconcern about how they would, again, releasing and providing their resources out in the Black community. So I strongly suggested to them that they put together a advisory committee comprised of people of color to help guide how they're doing their lending and what areas they should be focusing on in terms of distributing their capital out in the Black community. Thank goodness that suggestion was embraced, and so now we're forming a advisory committee to help guide some of that decision making internally. But I certainly agree with you. You don't see enough Black bankers, particularly when you talk about community development. And I remember back in the early 90s, when we were first beginning to get more involved in CRA, one of the things we advocated to the banks that we needed to see people that look like us working in those banks out there in those communities. And so we advocated, as Antoine had said, we advocated, and we advocated to the point that we got those banks to hire blacks that could be the face of their community development programs and who understood what was needed in the black community. So let me just ask this question here. Antoine, I'm gonna go back to you. What do you think we need to do to raise the knowledge and change the behavior patterns of black folks, particularly when it comes around money and credit?
Well, I think that there are a few things that we can do. One is there's been a movement to have financial literacy in the community, starting at a very youthful age. I think that if more people own property in their community, I'm originally from Buffalo. The black homeownership rate in the city of Buffalo is 27%. I live in Upper Marlboro. Some of the towns in our area, the black ownership rate is like over 70%, 80% in some of the towns. So, when our people see that we can do it, they know that they can do it. So we got to really make owning property, saving money, investing money attractive. That's why right now you have so many young people that are into real estate investing, buying the block. We have to harness that energy, make that part of the collective psyche, and really push that on an ongoing basis where we own things more. One of the pitfalls of integration has been this overall assault, intentionally, unintentionally, on black business development and on home ownership at the same time. So while we have seen this kind of explosion of as indicated black women-owned businesses, black male-owned businesses, many of them have sales of less than 80,000, revenues of less than 80,000 or 100,000 a year, only employ one person. So we've got to get people to support our black businesses. We've got to put more pressure on our local, state, and federal officials and our community leaders to demand that there's greater accountability on the sharing of the resources. Because I can tell you, as being on a city council in Buffalo, being in the state senate in New York, being here in D.C. on the federal level, I just don't think that we do enough to demand and fight on the front end. So we look at what happened with the Paycheck Protection Program, a multi-trillion-dollar stimulus bill, and our people got very little resources for that on the business side. And I think that while there was some catch up, the fact of the matter is our people were really got a raw deal, and we have to fight harder. We know it's not easy, but we have to fight and demand that we get those resources, because when you help one small black contractor or one mom and pop business, then they can bring, not only do they go in business, but then they got to buy office supplies. They got to buy computers. They got to buy this. They got to do that. They can then reinvest that money in other things. And it takes time to be able to watch them grow, but it's a great investment. And so I would say on the issue of educating our people, we have to just, we got to just speak it into existence. Our people have always survived on less. We have to tell that narrative, and then we have to inspire. Our people need to get life insurance. We need to own land. We need to start businesses, and we need to make sure that we have life insurance. If our people could do those three things and then push our elected officials and clergy and community leaders to rally behind those three principles and get the schools functioning a little better, there's no stopping Black people in America.
Okay. Well, I do want to just come back and say something to the audience. We are going to be taking Q&A at about 8 o'clock. So if you post your questions in that you have in questions, we'll feed those questions out to all the panelists to respond to you. What prompted this conversation that we're having around Black community development has been prompted around our desire to strengthen the Black community development ecosystem. And I'm talking about all those entities that help make up a healthy and vibrant community, whether they're agencies doing cultural work, health work, actually doing physical development, small business. Our ecosystem is very fragile in many of our Black communities. And so one of the things I think that's really necessary is to stop what I call the economic bleeding that's moving around Black communities. Too many organizations are coming into Black communities doing work to improve Black communities, but not doing work to increase the wealth and economic stature of Black communities. Nonprofit organizations who are doing affordable housing are hiring outside entities to come into communities and do the work instead of hiring locally. Hiring locally, not just to do the contracting, but hiring locally in all levels. And so there has to be some re-examining of how folks see themselves doing business in Black communities and brown communities, because what we've done has not worked. It's been extractive economies where money may come in through federal programs and not do a hill of beans in terms of creating any pathways for economic vitality in many of those communities. We're getting near the end, and I do want to just wrap up. Give me a few minutes, Jerry, and then I'm gonna pass it back to Antoine, and then we're gonna open up our mics for the audience to ask their questions. Go ahead, Jerry.
Okay. Well, in closing, I'll just say, we promote entrepreneurship. We believe that entrepreneurship in our communities create opportunities. Entrepreneurship has always created opportunities, regardless of the situation that we may have found ourselves in. You can go back during the times of slavery, and you've had businessmen and women that, through their entrepreneurial spirit and efforts, bought their way out of slavery, bought themselves out, bought their families out. This has continued, but we've got to do a better job of supporting, as a community, supporting our businesses. We want things. We've seen during the COVID-19 pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement, we've seen that, now, Black businesses got some attention. They got some support. But this doesn't need to be a seasonal thing. It should be a permanent thing in our community. We should still, where it's, if we're doing real estate, we're going to purchase a home, use a Black realty company. If we're purchasing, use our physicians, use our attorneys, use our construction companies. I'm always shocked by the fact that, I talk to, and I don't want to beat up on our churches, but I see a lot of churches, they build new buildings, new sanctuaries, and that kind of thing. And there's not a Black general contractor to be found on the job. And in some cases, it's so bad that maybe if you say, hey, I don't want to use a general contractor, you could at least use a subcontractor. But we've got to do better. We've got to change our mindsets on how we perceive each other and realize that we are as good as or better than anyone else that's out there from a business standpoint. So we really need to be better about supporting our businesses, whether that's a radio station. We've seen the number of Black radio stations across America reduce. If it's a Black newspaper, we need to be about supporting those things. We need about supporting the things that are in our community. And so, unless we can do a better job of that, it's just going to be tough. It's going to continue to be an uphill battle. But we've got to believe in our talents. Not to say that you don't use anybody else, but we've got to give our folks a chance
Right.
because they're in our communities, they're serving us, and I want to see us do better.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Antoine.
Yeah, I want to thank Jerry for his point, and I want to echo a couple things on there. Number one, he knows very well that it is widely known that black dollars are circulate less than 6 hours in our community, and that's a large part of our problem, that we don't have enough internal support, and we have all these external forces that are working against the black consumer and black businesses in particular. One of the things that I think that we must demand of our officials is to do more around wealth building. Ron, I think you were right on the money, and I think that's the laser focus. There is not enough focus on black wealth by black leadership. It's sporadic, it's inconsistent, it's not laser focused the way white folks typically are. Not all white leaders do that, but their business community, when it speaks loudly. And I think for African Americans, we must be bold, we must be demanding around wealth creation, because when black people and black businesses have money, when black people own land, they have power. Land has always represented power in the United States of America, whether during slavery or to the present. Land has always represented power in the country. And so I would say that at the local level, you need to demand, and there are not small business programs designed to help black people. We need to ask why not. If they have economic development agencies operating in your community, make sure that they're lending to black people. If there are development projects going on in many of these neighborhoods, very few, as Ryan indicated, are using black contractors, black workers, black suppliers, black agents, black title companies, black furniture stores. A lot of that is just not happening, and we are spectators in our community while things are happening. We got, I'll never forget this, and I'm going to be quiet after this. I'll never forget several years ago, I was on the city council, and they were building a new library in my community. And I'll never forget having a vigorous debate with a white council member who said to me that your community doesn't care about who's working on the project. They just want to see something done in the community. And I said they want to see both. I said, could you imagine if a library was being built in North Buffalo and all the workers and all the contractors and all the suppliers were all black? You think you wouldn't get a phone call on that? And she just turned beet red. And that's the mindset that happens. And too often with our officials, we're not putting enough pressure on them to demand change. And so we hear this thing, while we can't do this for black people, we can't do that for black people. Well, when Native Americans, if you know anything about the state, federal government, they write set-asides for them that specifically say Native American. And for some reason, over the last 30 years, we have allowed that narrative to say we can't do that for black people because we don't want to fund a disparity study. We don't want to rock the boat. Well, white folks get privileged, black people get denied, and Native Americans, bless their heart, at least they are cut into the law to get something. And we're often just spectators and getting the crumbs on the table and what's left over.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. We're going to open up for some questions. I know we could have taken this conversation much, much longer, but it is a conversation that will have some footing as we go forward in terms of driving some of these policy changes that we know that are needed if we're going to address the wealth building in black communities. And yes, I think every organization, particularly Black organization, be a nonprofit or for-profit, needs to have a wealth building agenda attached to their programmatic work. And if we don't, then I think we're missing, sadly, the most important element of how we're going to build sustainable communities and neighborhoods if we don't address the issue of this wealth divide and how to build wealth. So there's a question here about asking, Jerry, this goes back to the question you asked about, you were making about churches. Someone asked, do you see a change in that narrative around churches as an economic and spiritual center in the Black community?
The question is, do I see a change?
Yes, the question is, historically, the Black church was an economic and spiritual center. Do you see a change in that narrative in today's church?
No, that's going to be there, and it should be there. I just believe that the church needs some partners, and I'll give you an example what I'm talking about. We have a church that's one of our members that they have a congregation about.
Let me interrupt you 1 second, and I want to because of the fact that we got these questions coming in, I want to keep your as short as you can keep your answer. That would be helpful so we can get as many questions as we can. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll make it quick. I think that's going to remain, but I think the churches should incorporate other folks in their community that can help them. For example, we work with some churches on land purchases and strategic land purchases in our communities, where we can go back, and if they want to do affordable housing, they can do that, or if they want to do like business development, retail development, we can help them with that. So I think no one group can do it by themselves. So I think they'll remain, but I just think it's better if they can incorporate more other entities that can help them in carrying out what they want to do.
Antoine, do you want to respond to that question as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, we have a number of partnerships with faith-based organizations and churches. And so the church, no doubt about it, is the largest landowner in the Black community. And he is absolutely correct. What we need to be able to do is oftentimes they have the land, they have the buildings, but they may not have the technical know-how. And we need to develop those relationships. And we've got to get the capital and the resources to maximize the assets that a lot of our churches have, especially those pastors and those clergy leaders who have a kind of a entrepreneurial spirit, have a community-minded spirit, and village building spirit. We have to partner with them, grow what they're trying to do, so that we can have that multiplier effect to build their resources, but also to grow community resources at the same time. So some of those churches, very few of our churches have credit unions. Some do, some don't. Our Black banks are very undercapitalized. There's no reason why, with all the Black churches we have, all the Black elected officials we have, all the Black businesses that we have, that we're not recycling those dollars and working more together to have a greater impact for our people.
Yeah. We have 20 Black banks nationwide now. And so this next question may speaks to that. They talk about payday loans and the unbanked Black consumer today who use the payday loan companies to cash their checks and to do their banking. So the question, is this a policy and practice that daily affects the revenue in our community? How do we measure what is the measurement on the impact of payday loan companies in Black communities? We see them all sprinkled throughout many communities. What is the economic impact that these businesses have on the Black community in terms of wealth building?
I mean, I think that it has a lot of impact on it because of the fact that many of these things are predatory. So our people are constantly using their scarce resources to enter into these financial relationships. So I think he was talking earlier about the fact that we need more CDFIs, because CDFIs, if our people need an emergency loan, and we have more of those in our community, at our churches and in our black banks and at our community organizations, if someone needed a little $500 or $1,000 or $200 a loan, it would be better for them to go to a CDFI in their community and get a loan, as opposed to go to one of these payday loan places. So we've got to really get our people energized around these wealth building opportunities. There are fewer black banks in the country. There are very few black CDFIs. There are very few black credit unions. But meanwhile, we have thousands of churches, thousands of black organizations, lots of elected officials that are in different key and powerful positions. We have blacks in corporate boards and all these different positions, but I don't think that we have established a significant community first agenda that has been widely disseminated. So there's a group called Blackwell 2020 that's pushing some issues, but I just think that that's not enough. We need everyone doing what you said, Ron, earlier, making sure that there's some wealth building strategy at the local, state, and federal level for all of our organizations and all of our community stakeholders.
Well, thank you. Jerry.
Hey, Ron, I was going to say real quickly on that, we have a number of those in our state, and there's been some legislation put forward to limit, the rates that they can charge folks, because, we know they're taking advantage of people. And, the telltale sign is, and I'm going to go old school, if you pick up a phone book and you start looking at all these types of businesses, if you look pretty much in, at least in our state, in any city, you find that the greatest number of them are largely located in black communities.
Yes.
So that's like that's a telltale sign that something's not right, because if it was good, our communities are not going to be loaded up with them. They'd be elsewhere. So, as Antoine was saying, we have to have a group voice and just stay on it. And as I mentioned before, it just can't be situational. It needs to be 24/7, 365 days a year. Just banging that drum and letting people know that, hey, this is unacceptable. We're not going to have this in our community, and let our legislators know we're not going to accept that. And you need to come up with some legislation to stop some of these practices.
Yeah. This question is coming and asking, and Jerry, I'll direct this question to you. How can black businesses do more advertising to the black consumer, their business, without knowing that we have an aging population that doesn't use the internet to do their research? But how can black businesses do more regarding advertisement in the black community to advertise their goods and services to the consumer?
There are a number of ways. Not everybody does social media, so of course we know social media is an awesome tool, and some of it has to be old school. One thing we talk about when people come in, one basic thing is, you're starting a business. I'll say the first folks that should know about your business after your family is, if you go to church, everybody at your church should know that you have a business. They should know about your business. We find that many of our churches have church directories where they let people know where their businesses are. So that's one way. Another method is just going old school. If you're a member of any kind of organization, you're like a Mason, you're in a fraternity, sorority, all of those folks should know about your business. And then better still, if you've got a black chamber, then normally your black chamber is going to have a business directory of some sort to help you identify the black businesses and to help market your business, because they can do referrals. They typically have newsletters sending out information. or some kind of old school, either an online Black Pages directory or a hard copy Black Pages directory. Those are just some of the things. And some of it will depend on the type of business that you have, because whatever business you're in, you have to look at what your current competitors are doing and how they're being marketed, because in most cases, you're going to have to do something similar.
You know, I would just say this to my observation in terms of what I see not happening in many Black communities. And when I talk about the community development ecosystem, there aren't enough what I call buffers in our community that's helping to grow education and awareness around the work that's needed in our community. So let me point an example of this here. Our young Black entrepreneurs. I can go into Baltimore City, and in no Black community do I see a co-working space that brings together young Black entrepreneurs, where they can come in and develop their ideas and collectively network. I think one of the things that we don't put a big value on is networking, and that we have to do more networking in terms of our resources, do more collaboration. Mr. Odd, who's on earlier, was talking about that, but we're not doing enough of that. And so we really got to start making the links. I know George Fraser has spent his career talking about the importance of networking. And so I think that one of the things as we go forward, particularly in how we are going to manage ourselves, our communities through this pandemic, is that we have to build a stronger networking environment among Black businesses and Black organizations. Would you gentlemen agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I definitely agree with that. I think that this COVID-19 and this the racial unrest after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor has opened up a lot of eyes. I think it's very true that we have to do more networking. We can't allow this to be a flashpoint. We have to make sure that this is consistent systemic change. But I think it requires all of us to use our various platforms to reinforce that message, right? Because our people are sharing a lot of mess on social media. We're writing about a lot of stuff that is important to a certain degree, but it's not going to move the needle. And we know that there are things that will move the needle. We know that education will move the needle, whether it's vocational training or academic education or business training. We know that those three things on the education front will move the needle, so we got to fight for it. We know that if our people use social media more than any other community, Black people use it, we are over-indexed in social media. However, we're not utilizing it enough to advance the message around Black wealth. And so I know every chance I get, I'm sharing information around Black wealth building. I'm trying to share anything I know about how somebody can start a business, grow their business, or who we need to be fighting or calling on to do something. And I think all of us, through our sphere of influence, need to constantly offer tips, information, informally, formally, to our respective networks about growing your business, fighting for your business, getting capital, and demanding change. That's the number one thing. If we don't get anything right here, your thing about conscious community Black development, if we don't raise the issue, we can't expect people to do it, because, as I told you earlier, you know, some people think we should just be happy that the sidewalk's getting fixed. Some people should think we should just be happy that the playground is getting repaired or that we got balls. It doesn't matter if we are supplying the balls, we are manufacturing the balls, we are selling the balls. We should just be happy that we playing ball, right? As Trump said, and I don't want to be political, but we have to educate our people, because if we educate the mind, the body will follow.
Hey, Ron, one quick thing. I was going to say on the marketing piece, just real quick. One of the things that we're working on right now is to create a statewide Black business directory with all of the Black businesses we know that we can identify and more to follow after we do the initial launch. But one of the things that we're going to do, because we recognize that you mentioned about the age thing, and not everybody does a lot of social media, but we do know for sure that pretty much everybody of any age, and we've seen people that are 90-something years old, they have cell phones. So one of the things we're going to have that links to our directory is an app that can be on any phone that can identify the Black businesses in your particular area. And I believe in the DMV there is an app like that currently exists. And so that's another tool that can market.
I think you're spot on. A lot of our Black businesses don't have websites or apps. I know if you're looking for a Black real estate professional, they can always go to nareb.com and we can link you up with a Black real estate professional anywhere in the country, or and hopefully in most communities, a Black loan officer. Not always on the commercial side, but at least on the mortgage side. But we've got to push our people to invest in that limited technology, because you can get free websites as well. I mean, the phone book is obsolete. I mean, the hard copy. Now you got to have a digital phone book, a digital directory, texting services, stuff like that. Because think about it. How many of us that are on this call tonight have picked up a physical phone book in the last 5 years? Now, you've got one on your phone, you got one on your email, or you may have a scrap piece of paper or a Bible or something that you write numbers down on. But how many of us are actually going to the front door every fall and getting a regular phone book anymore? We have to replace that with other means to make sure that we're utilizing the tools to help brand our people. And we can never give up the word of mouth, because we know the community grapevine is good. When you go out of town and you need to get that hair cut or your hair done, you'll find that place, right? We got to be just as aggressive finding and supporting our other businesses the way we are for certain things that we want to support. We will find a church and a barbershop and a beauty salon. We will search high and low for those two. We need to make sure that we do that for the other businesses in our community as well.
Yeah. We touched on this earlier, and I just want to go back and revisit this conversation around education and awareness. I teach as an adjunct professor at the university here in Maryland. And one of the things I discovered this year is that many of our college students have no awareness of financial literacy. They're getting credit cards pre-approved to them, and they're taking those credit cards out and they're using them. And by the time they get out of college, their credit, in many cases, is in disrepair because they didn't know how to manage credit. And so one of the things I certainly, just like business, I think we have to still begin to educate. And we educate our young early on about business and ownership, because that's one of the things that's lacking in the Black community, as you mentioned, the turnaround of dollars, because there is no ownership of businesses in the Black community. So those who own the business reap their rewards and take their monies outside of our communities. So we have to push more ownership in terms of Black businesses, as Jerry was saying, around developing more entrepreneurs, doing more collaboration, because it can take 2 or 3 to start a business. And so sometimes you don't have to do it by yourself. And so there's work that we have to really do. Antoine, you've been echoing out, and Jerry, you've been echoing out the importance of how we have to begin to work better to scale more productivity, scaling more productivity. Because I think, Antoine, you said that 99% of the Black businesses have only 1 employee. Did you say that? Or did I hear that from someone else?
Yeah, I mean, it's I don't know if it's 99%, but it's over 90% of Black businesses have less than 1 employee. And so that is a big thing. And so what we need to be focused on is making sure that we have more youth entrepreneur programs for in our community. So in our cities, in our counties, in our states, we fund a lot of youth programs, but they're not wealth building programs. Just keep
Yes.
the kids off the street doing education and youth and recreation. But we need to be teaching our young people in schools about financial empowerment, right? In that,
Yes.
could be starting a business, can be also learn about their credit, right? You know, years ago they used to teach kids how to open a bank account. So what I'm saying is that there are dollars that are already committed to our kids, right? And we need to demand as advocates, right, conscious community development, that we want to see these programs offered to our kids. And I think if we start talking about that, other people will say that's a great idea. And it's not that they have not been created before. It's just they're a diamond in the rough. They're so far and few between. You know, we all know we all get asked to donate to this, donate to that. Well, why not when we donate to a little league football team, say to them, hey, y'all, I'm gonna give you $500, but I need you once a month to talk to the kids about financial literacy, and I got a speaker for you. That's the type of conversation we need to have with people, and we can do that if we just plant the seed.
Yes. Jerry, we're closing out on and nearing 8:30.
Okay.
And let me just share this to the audience. For any of you who do have questions, you can email them to us, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered by the panelists this evening. Jerry, I'm gonna give you 90 seconds to close out, and then I'll come back and give Antoine 90 seconds, and then we'll look to wrapping up this evening. Thank you. Thank you both.
All right. As I said, our organization is all about entrepreneurship to foster economic development in our communities. We know that economic development encompasses strategic planning, financial planning, investment, real estate development and reuse, workforce development, and business development. The great thing about being an entrepreneur is it's transferable. You can take your business, it can be passed on to other individuals, it can be passed on to family members. The great thing about being an entrepreneur is that you can create opportunities for other people. The great thing about being an entrepreneur is that you can do it at various levels. I had a student, and I was an adjunct professor also, who started a beauty pageant consulting business while in college and generated $40,000 a year doing it part-time, and that's how she paid for her college fees. So there's opportunities. We encourage everybody to be an entrepreneur at some level, whether you're doing it as a side hustle, part-time, or what have you. We encourage that. It's a great thing, a great way to give back to your community and make things happen. And if there's anything that we can do personally to help you, please contact us.
Thank you, Jerry. Antoine.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Ron, for all that you are doing to keep this movement alive and educate and empower people. At the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, we strongly believe that one of the ways that we close the racial wealth gap in the country is through increasing the rate of Black home ownership. Land has always been and will always represent power in America. Those who control the land control what happens on the land. We also know that, as I stated earlier, over 40% of all small businesses start in the home. So if we want to move this needle, we can't just say we want things to happen in our community. We must be the ones making things happen. We must be the ones demanding that things happen, and we must be the ones that are influencing what's happening in our communities. We talked a lot today about change. Change happens when the things that you are comfortable with you are no longer comfortable with the things that you are currently comfortable with. So we must become uncomfortable with the racial wealth gap. We must become uncomfortable with the economic injustice, the same way we have been historically uncomfortable from time to time with racial disparities in the human rights and civil rights community. I will end by saying Dr. King said that we must now focus on civil rights. We focus so much on civil rights, and every time that Black people focus on civil rights, the conversation changed. We're at a historic moment in America, and we need to call it what it is. This focus right now needs to be on civil rights for Black people right now. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Thank both of you, and thank all of you for joining us this evening. We have another discussion coming up next Wednesday. We're going to be tackling the conversation about reparations and how do we start reconstructing Black wealth and economic prosperity in America. And so on the 19th, we're going to have an open format where we're going to open up the mics and let all the participants come in, and we're going to have some open conversation. We're hoping to move this conversation to a movement around August the 28th in terms of the march that's taking place right now, being planned in Washington, D.C. We have to get Black community development on the national agenda. We have to get Black community development on the national agenda. However means that takes, we need to echo out the need to build economic vitality in Black communities. And so I want to thank everyone for hanging in there this evening. Again, stay connected to us. NDCCnetwork.org is our website. I didn't mention our partner who was not here tonight, but the Urban and Racial Equity Cure, Dr. Judy Lubin and her group, who've partnered with us, and she'll be back with us next week. Hope to keep you inspired. And as Jerry said and Antoine shared, if there's anything that we can do to help you and assist you, come and join our network. Take a look at us. We could use your spirit, and we could use your intellect. Again, thank you for joining us this evening, and we're going to be signing off. Thank you.